Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 12 of digital marketing. Today, we're going to be talking about a couple of things. First of all, you turned in your last assignment until the end of the semester yesterday, so that's all done. And so now we're just kind of wrapping up and putting the finishing touches on everything. You should have gotten your analytics assignment grade back already, so let us know if there's any questions or concerns with that. The tactics implementation should have been turned in yesterday. Hopefully everyone did that. As far as I know, I haven't heard anything that there's anything missing yet, but I will double check in the next couple of days to make sure it's all there. And we'll try and get you grades back on that within the next week, basically, so that you have some time to integrate all three components that you've turned in already, plus put whatever polishing and finishing touches you want on your final projects. Now, speaking of final projects, I have now made, and I'll bring it up so we can all talk about it. I'm trying to use, because I used to use Doodle all the time for this, but they seem to have been moving more and more to the paid tier. And for such a simple thing that I only use twice a year, I don't really want to pay money for it. So I've been trying to figure out if there's a way for me to do the appointments separately from where I normally would do it. And so I have been I'm trying to use the built-in Moodle scheduler. So you all should have gotten an email that had a link to the Moodle schedule, which looks something like this. I'll switch it to the student view so you can see what it looks like in your view. So you will see a view that looks like this, where it has a bunch of slots and everything. And for some reason, the one downside to it I figured out is that it won't let me actually say only one group can take a slot. It'll only let me say how many students can take a slot, but it'll let you schedule by group, right? Which is bizarre. Like, why can't I just say only one group can take each slot, right? But so you'll see a weird thing where, like, there's a team that only has 4 people on it signed up for 6 o'clock on April 27th. So it shows up as 1 out of 5 left. That actually means it's full, right? Because there's 4 students on that team.
Yeah, we got dibs. That's done. Sorry.
So so there are several others that have already been taken, and they just don't show up at all if the team has 5 people on it, right? But just so everyone doesn't get confused, 1 out of 5 does not mean there's one. I don't try and meet with 5 people at a half-hour time slot, 5 teams in a half-hour time slot, right? So if it says anything less than 5 out of 5, it's already taken, just so everyone's aware of that. Weird little, I don't know why they let you set up so you have to schedule by groups, and they let you mark that it's a group session, but they won't let you mark how many, one team per one group per session, which I think is kind of bizarre. If you logged in right away after you got the email, you might have gotten an error when trying to sign up for a slot. That was because apparently Moodle requires you to mark both the kind of scheduler module that it's a group event, but you also have to mark each and every time period that it's a group event as well. And I didn't realize that at the time, so I had it set up so the scheduler module was group, but the time slots were individual, and that apparently caused problems where no one could register, but I fixed that, so people are registering now. But just in case you got an error early on, please try again. It should be fixed by now, right? So these are the dates: April 26th, 27th, 28th, and May 1st, that we will be having final presentations. Originally, I think I said in a couple of spots May 2nd, but I realized today that final grades are due on May 5th, and having presentations on May 2nd, having everything due on May 2nd would just put a lot of time pressure on me and the grader to get all the team projects graded and put in time because we have to read through 8 fairly extensive documents, right, and grade them and before we turn in the grades. So I decided to make it May 1st. I think this is enough time slots. 3 teams have already signed up, I believe, so we still have plenty of time slots left for the other 5 teams in the class. So I think we're good. Any questions about team prep? Oh, I realize I haven't actually updated the due date. I'm going to write a note to myself to do that right now. I won't do it in class while we're in the sync session. But I haven't updated the due dates on Moodle to say May 1st for all the final stuff, but all of it will, so it currently says it's all due on May 28th, but I'll be changing that to May 1st shortly, just so everyone knows. Any questions about that? Awesome. Any questions about what you're turning in at the end of the semester? Okay. Awesome. Okay. I think we're good then. So what else is going on this week? Well, the other stuff going on this week is that we are doing a discussion of email and mobile campaigns. So you should see a couple of videos on that, including a discussion of AdWords, right, and how AdWords works. It doesn't quite look like what it does in the videos. I am actually starting to upload some of these videos, especially those ones, next week. But you have the last time you'll see the old videos for this class. But the basic principle is still the same. The grouping is still the same. The overall method is still the same. There's just a couple a little bit difference. For instance, there's now I think 3 headlines, whereas in the video I talk about 2 different headlines, right? And aspects like that have changed a little bit over time. So what makes this class always fun but challenging to teach, because Google is constantly changing its technology, Facebook's changing its technology, and so forth, right? This week we're also doing a reading on Stranger Things, which is interesting, and it's about how to use digital marketing to enhance, how to use co-branding to enhance in your digital marketing. To kind of enhance what's going on, and we'll have a hopefully interesting talk about that next week during the sync session. One last thing I wanted to remind everybody about. Let's see, is there anything else? Oh, in chapter 16 is the equivalent chapter in the new textbook. So one last thing I want to remind everybody about is that on April 17th. So in 2 weeks, we will be having Kelly Brackett from Alliance Sales and Marketing come to give a special talk, a guest speaker talk during the sync session. So I would highly encourage everyone to attend that who can attend that, right? Come prepared with questions. Kelly is prepared to give kind of a 20-30 minute overview of what she does. She is she's in charge of all the digital marketing for Alliance. So she'll be talking about what they do. And they represent a bunch of brands that you probably have heard of. RX Bars, if you know them. And at one point, I think they were representing Chobani. I don't think they are anymore, but I think they've now taken it in-house, but they were initially Chobani Yogurt's representative. But they basically sit between brands and retailers, right? Grocery store retailers specifically. So they're the ones who connect the brands to the grocery store retailers that they're working with in many ways. So they have a lot of cool, interesting entrepreneurs that they've worked with in the past. And so it'll be really interesting to see how they've helped grow those brands quite a bit. Overall in the times that they've been with them. And Scott Anderson, who's the overall CEO of Alliance, will be giving a talk at the Business Analytics Roundtable, which I'm hosting on April 26th. I will send out an email to everyone with that information. You probably have seen it already through some of the MBA email newsletters, but I'll send it out also for this class particularly. All students are invited to that event. It's in the Hunt Library on April 26th. We'll have the CEO of Alliance, Scott Anderson. We'll have the CEO of Bell & Howell there. We'll have the CEO for Toshiba Customer Global Solutions, which is their point of sale offering that they have. But we'll also have some academics. I've got a good friend of mine from Emory, Dan McCarthy, is coming in to talk on customer lifetime value modeling. We'll have a panel that deals with data science analytics in society. So there'll be a talk on how whether or not on the diversity of skin composition in images that are used for marketing and other things along those lines. So if you're interested in these topics, highly recommend you check it out. I know many of you are working professionals and won't be able to make it, but it is it will be a great afternoon. So And of course, it's free to any student, so that's the nice thing about it, right? Okay, I think that's it for announcements. Any other questions about anything we talked about here? Okay, awesome. Well, let's dive right in to third-party cookies then, which is our reading for this week. And this is, all the topics we talked a lot about high-tech topics in this class, but this is probably one of the more technical of the high-tech topics we're going to talk about. So let me share screen for some slides that I have on this topic, and we'll go from there. So before we go too far, anyone want to offer a definition of what a cookie is in the context of digital marketing? Not generally what a cookie is.
It is a snippet of code that is now this is the part that I don't remember exactly, but it's embedded or recorded, or in other words, it sticks around and somebody learns something about you.
Yep. And in fact, it's not even code; it's text. It's just plain text. But I'm at what you have your hand up. I see.
So, from my understanding, a cookie is basically a piece of code that is stored on your computer that a website can then look at to see what your preferences or your history or some information about you was, and it can be accessed later by that website or potentially by other websites, and it basically allows them to have some information on you and your session so that they can use it to either have the website look more like what you're used to or have your preferences saved in it, or if you want to be more cynical about it, then for advertising or retaining data about you.
Well, I don't think advertising's cynical, but other privacy invasive things might be for sure. 100%. Yes, that is correct, right? Christopher in the chat says a small text file, which yes, that is basically what it is. It is a simple little text file. Is just a unique string of numbers and letters that can then be tied to the person, and it is deposited on your computer in your browsers. Your browsers all maintain a space for cookies, and it's deposited on your computers into your browser in a way that other websites, potentially in the case of third-party cookies, can then access it, right? So it allows, without cookies, without cookies, it'd be hard to have things like computer logins, for instance, right? It'd be hard for a website to know that you were the same person who just typed your name and password in, right? And so you'd be typing in your name and password constantly and things like that, right? The web, as it was originally defined, was what we call a stateless system, right? It was never intended to be something where you had these like multiple transactions going on between a user sitting at a browser and a web server. It was meant to be that you just ask for data off the web and it gives it to you. So it never had any idea of how to maintain state, how to maintain that this person that just requested this web page is the same person who requested a different web page 5 seconds ago, right? And so without cookies, you would destroy the ability for modern websites to function in many ways. Now, that is all true, and yet, well, as we're talking about it, third-party cookies are going away. So, anyone want to take a stab at the difference between a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie? Yeah, Rachel.
I got this one.
Okay.
Okay, text. Same deal as a regular cookie, but it is all of your activity, not just the site you visit. So like, in other words, if you visit, I don't know, Google, right? And there's third-party cookies enabled, then all of your activity is discoverable, not just the one site you visited, right?
Yes, to some extent, except for it's not all your activity, right? It's just that any other website can access the data that was placed there by a different website, right? Does that make sense, Rachel? Right? So
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to say, but I'm not good at saying the lingo here. This is so technical for me.
Yeah.
What I gathered from it when I read your article was, gosh darn, these people they know where I'm going.
Yeah.
And then my second thought is, why are there not more ads about World War II history or something on my computer?
Yeah, Christopher, you want to join into the conversation here?
Yeah, so I think what differentiates it's the first party cookies are from that website, and generally you have a little bit more control over it, like you were saying with login or passwords or things like that. So it's created and controlled by the website owners. I think in marketing you can still use that, but it's just based off what information you've given on that website versus just across a bunch of different ones.
Right. So so the big key there is on that website versus across a bunch of different ones, right? So a third party cookie is a cookie that can be accessed by a website that was not placed there by that website, right? That's the big difference, right? So if google.com access it, or kind of a more typical example is it because it directly affected Facebook's bottom line, right? Is Facebook makes a lot of money off of third-party cookies, right? So Facebook will put cookies onto your machine, and then when you go to other websites, the other websites know that you are a Facebook user, and then they can go and access what you've searched for and what you've looked at on Facebook by paying Facebook some money to do so, right? And then serve up ads that are appropriate based upon your history, right? That ability, right, allows for people, it allows for what you're talking about, Rachel. It allows for people to be tracked across the web, right? So without third party cookies, it's really hard to track people across the web, right? Because it means the only thing I know as, say, bobsnewsunglasses.com is what you do on bobsnewsunglasses.com. I don't know anything about what you did on Facebook or Twitter or Google or whatever, right? I just know what you did on my own website. So that's the big difference between a first party cookie and a third party cookie. So now that we have the terminology down, right, let's go into the discussion in the article. So iOS has already basically removed third party cookies to a large extent. Safari doesn't support third party cookies. A lot of other browsers don't support third-party cookies anymore. In fact, I use the Brave browser. I think I've mentioned this, which is a Chrome variant, right? And Brave just by default turns off third-party cookies. You can turn it on if you want to turn on tracking of yourself. You can turn that on in Brave, but by default it turns off third-party cookies, right? And Google has committed to removing to by default banning third-party cookies going forward, right? What that simply means is that if you go on Chrome, if you go to, say, bobsnewsunglasses.com, and Facebook tries to put a cookie onto your machine saying that you visited bobsnewsunglasses.com, it won't allow Facebook to do so, right? And it won't allow Bob's New Sunglasses to access any cookies that are on your machine that are from any place besides bobsnewsunglasses.com, right? That's essentially what banning of third-party cookies means, right? So there's a big discussion about this because right now third-party cookies are used to help target and retarget people as they move across the web. So if you've ever searched for something on Google or clicked on an ad on Facebook and then found that same ad showing up on every single website you go to, that is what we call retargeting, and that's enabled by third-party cookies, essentially, right? It's a very cheap and easy way for companies to kind of track people quickly. So the removal of third-party cookies potentially prevents us from doing that, right? Which then brings up the question, does it matter, right? Does it matter that we can no longer retarget this? Now, in the article, I reference a researcher by the name of Augustine Fu, who I've actually had do a guest talk in this class before. And Augustine thinks that it doesn't matter very much. And the reason why is because if you do a good job of eliminating fraudulent clicks on your ads from your ad campaigns, that most of the most valuable clicks is what he's found in the past come from Safari users, right? Which implies that eliminating third-party cookies actually doesn't have very much value, right? Now, currently, if you were to just look at where a lot of clicks on your ad campaigns come from, it looks like a lot of them come from other browsers like Chrome. But his point is that most of those are actually fraudulent ads, right? So his argument is that it's more important to clean up the ad, the value, the ads that you're actually seeing. What is ad fraud? When we talk about fraudulent ads, what do we mean in this context? Does anyone know? Anyone want to offer a discussion? Yeah.
I can take
Oh, sorry.
a stab at it, or did somebody else? unmute?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I heard it all the way through.
What do we mean when we talk about fraudulent ad clicks? What are we talking about? Was the question. I meant. Yeah. So
Okay. I mean, I have an answer to that too, but I'll let somebody else go since I answered the last one.
okay, Rachel, you want to start?
It's when a bot or an ad agency, I guess if you want to get really suspicious, is clicking something to drive up the revenue from the clicks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And why? And I guess the question that comes up is, do you know how that happens? How they're able to do that?
No, but it's when I read about that, I really would like to know, because I want to know, how do you prevent that from happening? Is there safeguards? But I'll save that question.
Yeah. Ahmet?
So I assume they use bots or network of bots, basically computer farms or programs that look at a web page to see what they can click on, and then they follow the links that they determine to be of value to the firm paying for the advertisement, or the click. And I suspect some ways they try to circumvent being caught is to try to use multiple IP addresses or whatever. And one of the ways you can potentially try to crack down on it could be looking at the spacing between clicks, the geographical region the IP addresses are coming from, how fast they click, how deep they go, how much time they spend in the site that they go to after they click, and so forth.
Yeah, that's a lot of what you're talking about. Bots are often involved. Christopher, do you have some more discussion you'd like to add here?
Yeah, so ad stacking is a technique where they layer a bunch of ads on top of each other, but the user can only see the top one. But when you click on it, it still registers as a valid click for all those ads. So that's just another way that they can drive up ads.
Yeah, so they could have a published website where they have a ad, the legitimate ad, right? And the user clicks on it, but embedded into that website, they've also, in the HTML code, they've embedded a bunch of other ads as well. So the one click actually basically looks like it's spawning, say, 10 clicks, right, on different other ads at the same time, right? So that's one way to do it. But Ahmet's also right? One simple way to do that is, I have a quasi-legitimate publisher. I'm a quasi-legitimate publisher. If I'm participating in ad fraud, I'm not really that legitimate. That's why I put the quasi-legitimate up there, right? I'm producing real content potentially, right? And I'm serving real ads. And then I just hire a botnet to come in and pretend like they're a user reading the content and clicking on the ads, right? And so that's what ad fraud is in that context, right? And it's a little tricky because the ad stacking is in some ways easier, because then it's it's another user clicking on it. In this case, you're actually the same person who's publishing the content and clicking on the ad, and so you have to do more to hide your tracks to make it clear that because obviously most of the ad networks know this happens. They try and weed it out, but there's not, to be truthful, right? There's not a lot of incentive on them to weed this out, because it's not their money, right? So as an ad network, I make money off the like a small transaction fee between the advertiser and the publisher, right? And so the more clicks happen, the more money I make, even if they're fraudulent clicks, right? So Google, Facebook, Amazon are probably the largest ad networks out there, right? None of them really care too much about ad fraud in the end. Now they all claim to, because otherwise, if they didn't claim to, they wouldn't be able to attract advertisers, right? But in reality, there's not a lot of incentive. So anyways, ad fraud is a big problem. We know it's a big problem. It happens all the time. Depending upon who you talk to, it happens more often, right? Augustine Fu makes a business, out of going around and consulting with companies and telling them how to change their practices to remove ad fraud quite a bit, right? So that's all saying the removal of third-party cookies could have a very small effect on digital marketing if, in fact, it is true that most of the value that we're seeing from third-party cookies is from these fraudulent clicks that we're seeing right now. So the other aspect that's interesting, all this is, is anything going to replace it, right? So Google wants to be able to still keep track of your behavior off of Google's website, right? Facebook has a big interest in being able to track your behavior off of Facebook, right? Because Facebook can only sell you so many ads on Facebook, right? It wants to sell you ads on other places. Google luckily has an ad affiliate network that works pretty well, and so it's not as big of a deal for them to some extent, right? But and a lot of Google's ad revenue comes from Google's website, right? It's people clicking on the ads on Google itself, and those are all first-party cookies, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But in general, they want to be able to sell ads at other locations too as well. So how are we going to develop these new methods? And so that's a big question that we'll get to at the end today. But before we get to that, why are these cookies being eliminated? So any thoughts after reading the article about why they're being eliminated?
Privacy concerns for starters.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that that's obviously an issue, but it's not like Google or Facebook, especially, famously, Zuckerberg once said privacy is dead. So it's not like that alone is enough, right? If it was just privacy concerns, I don't think we'd be seeing some of this elimination, right? But
yeah, well, I think it's the sense of unfairness that people who may not deserve to have access to that information, or groups that may not deserve to have access to that information, would have access to it.
Yeah.
From the privacy standpoint, because
because
cookies aren't all being eliminated, it's just third-party cookies we're talking about.
Right. And as we mentioned at the top, right, eliminate all cookies would essentially destroy a lot of the modern web technologies that we're used to, right? So that's almost a no start, and it doesn't work to start that direction. But yes, this definitely helps enhance privacy and maybe removes disparities of information inequity, right? It prevents it from all being gathered at Google and at Facebook and at Amazon and places like that, right? Christopher, you had some.
Yeah, I think regulation is a big part of it with the GDPR and California's Privacy Act. So I think maybe some companies are seeing the writings on the wall, or Zuckerberg doesn't care, I think, in an ethical way, but if it becomes more part of the legal online landscape, then that's going to be consideration they have to work around.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right? The biggest concern is fear of regulation, right? That's what's motivating a lot of this. And we see this a lot when companies see early regulation come out and are worried about more regulation in that space, that they will often act as an industry to try and self-regulate, right? Kind of the classic example is the motion picture industry, right? Which was worried, originally there was no such thing as ratings, and people were worried about kids going to see essentially what we now call an R-rated movie, right? And so they created the motion picture something authority, right? That basically, I forget what the first A stands for, that essentially goes around and provides ratings to all movies, and prevented regulation, right? We've never seen regulation saying motion pictures have to be labeled in such and such a way, right? Because of the fact that the industry created a self-regulatory body, right? We might very well see something in the case of cookies eventually down the line, right? But as of right now, the different parties are acting independently. Apple doesn't make any money basically off advertising. It has an advertising network, right? Especially it's advertising on its TVs and movies and things like that now that do pretty well for it. But at the time at which it decided to eliminate third-party cookies, it didn't even really have an advertising stream. So it didn't care. It's like, we're not losing any money by doing this, and we don't want to be regulated and have to face additional burdens. So they just eliminated them, right? Google, actually, as we just mentioned, doesn't lose a lot because anything that happens on Google is still a first-party cookie for Google. So all your Gmail, all your Google Calendar, all your YouTube, all your Google stuff, that's all something they can track legitimately and share within the company. So they don't really care about third-party cookies to a large extent, right? And then, you know, to a large extent, and the only ones who are hurt are the companies that don't really have a major way to track information across multiple sites, right? So Facebook was one that was damaged quite a bit. When Safari eliminated third-party cookies, Facebook lost a big chunk of its revenue stream, right? These are the companies that are kind of being squeezed out. And that's part of the reason, you know, it's kind of an aside, but part of the reason why I think Mark Zuckerberg's betting so big on Meta, whether or not it ever works out, is because that would be a place now where he could control all the activity and understand all the information about what's going on. It would be a platform that he would have, because right now, besides the Facebook website itself and Instagram and the various other apps, he doesn't really have a quote unquote platform. Christopher says, you know, I think Apple did have an ad strategy and tightening privacy was a strategic step. Yeah, they, you know, I agree with you, Christopher, and feel free to comment, but I do think that like a big point of Apple's selling point when it realized it didn't have to worry too much when most of its revenue it knows are going to come from its device sales and not from its advertising strategy. It early on made the strategic step to kind of place itself as being a privacy aware space. Right? Do you want to add anything, Christopher?
No, I totally agree. I think they, you know, their business model is definitely hardware, but I think they, I mean, we always talk about how brilliant Apple is in business school, but God, they're brilliant. I mean, they killed two birds with one stone, saying we're going to hinge everything on privacy, knowing that we're building this huge walled garden, and kind of like you were talking about with Meta and Facebook, but we're going to be able to advertise, still respect privacy, but advertise within our walled garden and really stick it to Google and Facebook by, you know, taking the stance that we're against privacy and not going to let them track on our platform. It's so.
Yeah, it is quite brilliant a move, right? Like it's the one step that of all the big tech companies could easily try and claim that they're private, that they are the most privacy aware, right? And they're going to fight the most to protect your privacy, right? I agree. It was a very brilliant move on their part once you saw it. And this started, you know, in fact, the only complaint I would have from a strategic and analytics standpoint is that they may have spent too much money on that advertising campaign around privacy too early, right? They were really making a big deal of it about 4 or 5 years ago, even having ads during the Super Bowl about privacy. And I don't think anyone cared, and now they do to a large extent. So they may have, you know, they may have moved too early in this space, right? So yeah, those are all true, right? Privacy is obviously an issue, but as we talked about, I don't think many of these companies are doing it for altruistic reasons, right? They're doing it because they fear that if they don't do it, harsher legislation will be handed down, right? That will regulate them even more. And the GDPR, which is the European General Data Privacy Regulation, and the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, right, all specifically included starts to regulate. In fact, the GDPR was the reason why we all suddenly started getting those little notifications that said, we use cookies. If you want to enable cookies, here's the ones you have to choose or not choose, right? And that was because of the GDPR's initial regulation in the space. But many people viewed the GDPR as a kind of first shot across the bow, and that if the industry didn't self-regulate, you would see additional versions of something like the GDPR happen. So what should marketers do in anticipation of the removal of third-party cookies, right? So just to be clear, Chrome was initially supposed to ban third-party cookies at the end of 2021, if I remember correctly. If I remember my history dates correctly. and they delayed it to the end of 2023, right? So it's now currently on, it's supposed to happen at the end of this year, right? Now whether, when that happens or whether they push it back again will be interesting to see. The main reason why they haven't pushed it back yet is they want another solution. They want something that doesn't involve third-party cookies that could still give people the ability to tell that when someone comes to my website, give them a little bit of information about them so that I could deliver an appropriate context sensitive ad to them, taking into account user characteristics, right? So that's what they're searching for. And what we'll talk about is kind of how they're proposing to do that in a little bit. But before we get to that, what should you do in anticipation of that, right? Well, one thing that comes up again and again if you start doing any research into third-party cookies is people saying, well, we don't even use our first-party data well enough, right? Like we don't really know what our current consumers are doing on our website. And so one suggestion that always comes up is we could probably do better marketing, just figuring out what consumers are doing right now, right? In fact, I'll give you a quick example. I was talking to one of the larger charitable organizations in the United States that was talking to us about some potential research projects. And one thing they mentioned is they don't even look to see what content people see before they make a donation on their website, right? And maybe there's certain images that at certain times of year or certain situations or certain content is more likely to drive donor behavior than other images and content, right? And they have no idea because they just don't analyze their own data at all, right? And it seems like that's kind of an obvious first place to start in a lot of these cases. Augustine would argue that you should be looking into ad fraud, right? Like eliminating, examples of ad fraud. And he has some suggestions about how to do that. Some of it is just not allowing your ads to be distributed on websites that have certain characteristics, right? So like one he recommends is not allowing your ad to be shown on a website that's less than a year old, because if it's less than a year old, chances are it might have been started by a fraudster, right? And so that's one solution that he recommends, right, among others off the top of his head. And then finally, you can obviously, right now, while third-party cookies are still allowed, run A/B tests, right, where you run them with third-party cookies and without, and then look to see if there's any problem with the way you're doing your targeting. Right? Any other suggestions about what to do in the face of the removal of third-party cookies?
What to do
I don't know
in the face of.
So the fact that third-party cookies will potentially, say, right now Chrome is the most dominant browser used in the world, right? At the end of this year, approximately 90% of the most common browsers being used in the world will be not allow third-party cookies. So what should marketers do to prepare for that event is the question.
So I think somebody else was starting to go ahead again. I'm happy to
Go ahead, Matt. Go
open
ahead.
the floor.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that they can do is to use session data instead, and I think this is already on their way, which is if somebody has used Facebook or Google login, Apple has their own, though they're not allowing much data on there. But so when somebody logs into a website with a session that you can identify and you have their browsing data, you can market to that specifically without storing any information on their computer.
Correct. Yeah. So what we call social sign-in, right, which has become very popular, which is using something like Apple or Google or something like that to log in. You can then exchange information with Apple and Google about that person and their information. Is that what you're referencing on that?
Yes, but you don't even necessarily need to share information with them. You can just, the information you get as the marketer or the entity running the website tells you, where that login is navigating to while you can capture them. So you don't really need too much cooperation from, of course it would make it better if you have other browsing data from them, but the part you have access to is useful to you to begin with.
Yeah.
You were talking about how companies aren't just blindly altruistic and they're doing it for their own benefit. In the case of Apple, I'm what you would describe as a fanboy, and I do think it's some of their corporate values actually do align with respecting privacy, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I do believe that certain companies make decisions. I'm just not convinced that Apple does it completely altruistically. It also does it because it sees a strategic way to position its brand at the same time, right?
They were already having discussions with Google about giving Google too much user information back when like Google Maps was a nascent thing. So you know, I do think that's one of the values that sort of permeates through Apple. But again, I'll shut up about that.
No, I agree. Christopher, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so are you asking specifically in terms of like tracking or just marketing tactics in general?
So in general, if you're someone who relies upon third-party cookies, right, or
Right.
what should you do in
I
preparation?
mean, so the article touches on this a little bit, but I think that you really need to diversify your marketing efforts. So, you know, look at email marketing, look at social media, even affiliate marketing. I think it's just third-party cookies have been kind of an easy way and a cheap way to kind of, you know, rest on your laurels, but like we know it's coming. It might get pushed back or it might happen sooner or later, but I think it's now's the time for marketers to really look at, you know, what other tools do we have that aren't going to be as related to this. And on social media, you know, you don't really rely on those as heavily. So I think that's got to be a big step in the next step.
Yeah, I totally agree, and well, you know, in some respects, but the notion of a portfolio, right, of behavior and using a portfolio of behavior to drive your marketing efforts, as opposed to relying upon any individual single source of data, is important, right? Because like anything, right, if something tweaks or something changes, right, you could have some serious problems with it, right? And this is a classic example where if you're relying too heavily to use third-party cookies to target your ads, right? Then and all of a sudden third-party cookies get removed, then you have no way to target your ads. So coming up with different ways using other methods such as email marketing, other approaches, I think is a valuable source. And Katie in the chat asked the question: is there a reason that companies are prioritizing third-party data over their own first-party data, right? And you know, Ahmet answered that perhaps cost and basically allowing your marketing or data gathering to be outsourced. Yes, and I also think it's you know, a lot of these companies, they don't do their own, they don't have a lot of resources internally to do the targeting for the digital marketing, right? And so they rely upon third-party vendors. Well, third-party vendors a lot of time are the ones who have the ability to analyze all this third-party cookie data, right, and to provide you with better targeting in that space. And so it's much harder, it's much easier for a third-party vendor to analyze, say, third-party cookie data, which they're used to looking at for a variety of different people, and tell people whether or not they should target a certain individual, than it is for them to adapt a solution to each and every company that comes along and looking at their first-party data, right? So there's kind of two different distinct connects there, right? The other thing that's important to notice and mention in this, right, is that first-party cookie data only helps you if the user actually comes to your website, right? If they're on other websites, you have no way to know if you should be targeting them. Whereas with third-party cookie data, you can potentially target people on other websites, right, already, and use that to help you understand what they're doing, right? I think there's a number of reasons why they've been relying upon third-party cookie data, but the point is, and first-party cookie data is not ever going to provide the same richness as first plus third-party does, right? Don't get me wrong, but you know, there's some additional lift to be gained from looking at first-party data in more depth. Any other comments, questions about that?
I had a question for you actually. If you're using first party cookies and using something like contextual marketing, where you're really focusing on advertising based off what people are seeing there, do you know if people have done a lot of A/B testing with that? If they've compared that to the third party strategy, has that been written about or discussed a lot?
You know, off the top of my head, I haven't seen a lot, though I have seen so that's not true. I know people have tested it. I haven't seen a very clear, definitive statement like that this one is better than other, and here's some good solid proof as to why, right? I know that whenever the elimination of third-party cookie data comes up, people respond by saying, yes, we should rely more on contextual advertising. And then a debate occurs where people are saying, no, contextual advertising doesn't do you any good because you don't know the reasons why the people are on that page, seeing that content. You know, whereas if you have the third-party data, you might know more insight into like if someone's looking at, say, a page, you know, a class example I used to use in one of my classes was a picture of a guy who lived in like a standard house in the South, and he had a den that was equipped with nothing but Ferrari stuff all over the place, right? This guy's never going to buy a Ferrari, right? But he has everything associated with Ferrari that he could possibly get his hands on, right? And my point is that if he's going to the Ferrari website and you have third-party data, you have a good bet. You have a good bet as to whether or not he's actually going to buy a Ferrari, right? Whereas if you don't have that, right, just using context of visiting that website, you might start showing fairly expensive ads that he might click on, even though he's never going to make a purchase, right? And so that's the debate that happens back and forth all the time in this space.
That's a great point, because earlier when you were saying, you know, that those ads follow you, as just a normal user, I find it jarring when I'm looking at like a coffee webpage and then there's some advertisement for like garden tools. I'm like, this, like, that's so off-putting to me. I'm almost not going to click it just out of principle. Like, but I see your point too. If you don't have that background info, you might be barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's a debate that occurs. So my answer to your question, I guess, is that I haven't seen a definitive statement one way or the other that, you know, this is definitely a good solution or it's definitely not. It's just I've just seen fights back and forth on, you know, on the internet about these two topics, right? Two approaches.
I'm going to sound like the token dinosaur saying this, but our marketing team said this to me a while back, and it has stuck with me ever since. We were talking about Google reviews and all of that, which is important to us. And she said, Rachel, you know, 80% of marketing is making sure the customer has a good experience when they walk in the door. And that raises a thought in my mind when we're talking about third-party cookies too, that if you're a business, a service industry, for example, people serving people, then what is the multiplicative value of one promoter who's willing to not only post something online, but tell other people, and how relevant is that return on investment to the overall business? Now, I know that can be quite different from, say, merchandising or something like that, but
yeah, well,
just a thought.
Yeah, right. If you're talking about like one consumer advocate, basically, versus
yeah, the power of a promoter versus a detractor and all of that.
Yeah, and we know that that's the case. Like, I mean, honestly, yeah. So, like, most of the studies done in this space, right, for most verticals, have shown that the power of word of mouth marketing, or, you know, consumer advocate marketing, is roughly an order of magnitude more than anything we do in terms of this kind of advertising, right? So you get a 10x increase from having, you know, one person out there providing word of mouth descriptions of what's going on versus a digital marketing ad campaign that you're running, right?
True. And I will tell you the danger of saying that to someone, as a person that marketing reports to, the question that came into my mind, although thankfully I know better, is, okay, wait a minute. Well, if 80% is a good experience, then why is your budget what it is versus like, that was literally the first question that came in my head. And then I thought, okay, I know better, and that's not what she meant to say, but I wouldn't recommend saying that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of the reason why I do think that marketers should spend more time thinking about word of mouth marketing and less time thinking about interruptive or various other forms of marketing out there, right? That we should be devoting more of our budget to things like social media and Google and stuff like Google reviews, right? And stuff like that, and less on kind of these other aspects out there. I totally agree with that notion, right? Yeah, it reminds me of the old Wanamaker quote, right? Half my advertising budget is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half, right? So let's talk a little bit about the potential solutions that are coming. Oh, wait, we've got one more slide before we get there. Sorry, I don't have all my slides memorized. So the next slide, right, is generally the question of, on balance, is this going to be a good thing for digital marketing? Because, for instance, Rachel, one other thought I was thinking you were going to have was that you were heading down is, well, what if they see an ad on a website, it's highly targeted towards them, they come in and then we don't offer the services they need, whatever they are, right, for that, and then they have a bad experience, and now I've got a detractor driven by digital marketing in my group, right, rather than a promoter, right? And so, and I'm not saying that would necessarily is true for your particular organization, right, but that could definitely happen, right? And so there's some discussion that the removal of third-party cookies will actually be a good thing, because it will force marketers to be more precise with their marketing and targeting, right? Rather than relying upon sketchy third-party data that might not be accurate. The other thing we have to remember is, we talked about like the person who lives may not be able to afford a Ferrari, but what if we have them totally wrong? And actually he's a secret millionaire, right? Who can afford a Ferrari, and we just don't know about it, right? It probably takes more than a millionaire now to afford a Ferrari, but yeah. Hey,
Well,
Rachel, did you have some thoughts? Yeah.
well, just to your point about that, when I look at the portion of our marketing budget, for example, that is focused on the digital marketing, I the number one thing that I question is how much of this is bogus, is going to someone that is absolutely driving no value. Our number one competitor, for example, I guess I have searched their site enough that now all of their ads are popping up on all of my social media, which I love, because there's some part of me that's like, oh wow, you're wasting this. If I click on this, it's a waste of your money. Um,
Yeah.
but you wonder about that. That's for us such a significant portion of an already very large marketing budget, that what I truly want to see, and I know it's hard in marketing to a certain extent, is all right, what is an absolute return on investment here? Like, how do we truly connect the dots
Yeah.
with where the spend is going?
Yeah. So yeah, Christopher says, "Are you committing click fraud? Is that what you're doing?" Rachel, no, I'm just joking. But
That's how we roll. I didn't say I clicked on it. I just said I see it a lot.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm the same way. You wouldn't believe how many MBA ads I see for me to enroll in a university running an MBA program, and I just kind of have to laugh every single time, right? So, or I get promoted posts on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn monitors what content I post. I post a lot about technology and marketing, and so I'll get ones that are for like software developer in digital marketing, and I'm like, that's not really the career path I'm on anymore, right? So and but someone's paying for that post to show up in front of me, right? And so it's always intriguing to me that the different things we get in that space. So I agree with you. And it kind of jokingly, and Christopher mentions that he thinks about this cartoon every single time he scans a VIP card or anything like that. But it is interesting how much people are willing to give up in order to get access to small little benefits, right? The kind of the transaction level data and reward level data that people give up in this space, it's pretty amazing. It's a great source of data, don't get me wrong, right? That the company knows about you, but I do feel like there is a need to move to more and more other content out there that could help out with these things. Oh, it's 8 o'clock, I just realized. So I did want to talk a little bit. I'll just talk for 5 minutes quickly about what is happening in this space. And I encourage you to spend some time checking out this website separately from our conversation today. But Google, and in fact, it's not even this is a this is the post that they made in about their updated timeline for when they're going to phase things out. But what I really want to show you, let me see. Actually, this is not the best one. This is the Google Privacy Sandbox. Okay. So I can put a link to this on the web too, as well on the Google. So this is what Google is attempting to investigate to look into different solutions to the elimination of third-party cookies. And the proposals that they're looking at are several, right? And let's see, the one I want to look at is typically, that's it. I always forget. There it is. Is show relevant content and ads. So this is really the replacement for third-party cookies, and they have essentially 3 proposals that they're still considering, right? Topics API, Flock API, and Fledge. Flock, as you'll notice, says the development of Flock was stopped in 2021, right? So Flock was the idea that they would not track you as an individual, but they would see what things you were searching for, what content you were viewing, and they would assign you to a group. And then whenever an advertiser wanted to advertise to you, it would say Christopher is in this group, right? And it would that they could then take that content into account, deciding who to advertise to. Yeah, cohort marketing sometimes. In fact, it uses the phrase cohort in its description, right? The problem with this is that there was some early scientific analysis that basically showed that flocks could be racist and sexist and various other things, right? Because essentially they're stereotypes. They're like, based upon your past behavior, we think you're like this, right? And so therefore we're going to put you in a group that has a lot more women in it, or a lot more Black or brown people in it, for instance. And then we're going to show ads. And then advertisers could be like, I don't want the group that has women in it, right? And then only advertise to men, which is not a problem for most products, right? But if you're thinking about things like advertising jobs, for instance, right? Or advertising certain aspects that might be sensitive that everyone should be able to access to, right? Has the potential to be discriminatory, right? So Google stopped developing Flock because it became clear early on that it had too many problems. So they basically came up with 2 other solutions, Topics API and Fledge. Topics is the easier one to understand, so I'll talk about that real quickly. Topics is essentially like, what things do you show interest in the most, right? So do you show interest in sports sites? Do you show interest in gardening versus coffee, right? Do you show interest in Ferrari, right? Whatever you show interest. And Chrome will tell anyone when you're coming to a website, here are the top 10 things that that person is most interested in, right? Doesn't reveal your age, your gender, your anything like that. It tells them these are the things you're most interested in. So this is something to kind of aid contextual marketing. So I'm looking at a website on coffee. I know Christopher's really interested in coffee. Probably not going to show him a gardening advertisement, right? I'm going to show him something else instead, right? Unless, for whatever reason, gardening is his second most important topic, right? That's the basic idea.
I actually do like marketing.
And then, so that's topics. Topics is interesting. It avoids the problems with Flock because it's individually tailored, right? But it's not stereotyping the individual necessarily, right? It's based upon places that they've actually been to. Fledge is another one that's very unique and is really reliant upon Web3 technologies to a large extent. What Fledge says is, why should you ever send any of your data to the web when your browser could just do the ad matching? So what happens in Fledge is Google would send a set of, say, 10 ads to your browser, and your browser would then conduct an auction based upon where it had known you had been in the past and what ad would be most relevant to you on that ad for that particular context, right? And so as a result, theoretically, if you trust Google's statements on this, none of the information ever leaves your computer, right? It just stays on your computer. The advertisers would get some sort of they would know that this many people clicked on ads, but they wouldn't know who they are, right? The publisher would know that you were served an ad and they need to get money from it, but wouldn't know what ad you got served, right? And so there'd be this disconnect between the privacy issues, right? Because no one would be able to figure out what ad you clicked on and what pieces of past information your browser picked up on to deliver you that ad. Does that make sense? It's a weird one, right? Because it's like it doesn't solve the problem by stopping it from happening. Instead, it solves the problem by containing the privacy loss to your machine, right? So that no one else can ever see it, right? So it's a cool idea. I think it's probably the most innovative of all the ideas they've come up with. It does mean that potentially it would mean your browser would run a lot more slowly, right? Because it's now having to run ad auctions, right? Those are nowadays on most modern computers not an issue, but the Chrome is already known to be kind of slow, so it's potentially a problem compared to the other browsers, right? Anyways, I highly recommend take a look at the Privacy Sandbox, kind of read through it, see what the kind of solutions are that are potentially coming along, because these are what advertisers are going to have to deal with in the future, right? I'll leave it there for today. Any questions or comments on third-party cookies to wrap up? Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great conversation as always. And as always, we've had such a great conversation. We've kind of run over time, but I will stop the recording here and we will end for the day. And I look forward to talking to you all about Stranger Things next week. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.